Hey everyone, today I wanted to discuss the concept of schemas, that is perceptual or interpretive cognitive frameworks. These schemas, perceptual interpretational models, are acquired throughout the course of time through the gathering, acquisition, and integration of information through experiences such as research or even daily normal life experiences. And these frameworks are essentially constructed in a manner to help bring about stability within the psyche as we move about in the world. It's these underlying structures that help us both orient and navigate ourselves through the world as we encounter daily life and make different decision choices. Oftentimes they're all rooted within these knowledge structures, perceptual structures that we've built up over the course of our lifespan. The concept of schemas originated in the 1930s through the work of Bartlett. He perceived schemas as cultural cognitive frameworks wherein prior knowledge shapes perception and memory. Piaget, the developmental psychologist in the 1950s and 60s, expanded on this concept within a developmental framework. He perceived them as developmental structures, wherein one assimilates and accommodates novel information into their existing framework throughout the course of their lifespan. And this helps transform, and this assimilation accommodation process is essentially a mismatch of new information to the existing perceptual framework. And what happens is if that mismatch, depending on the degree of mismatch, if it's a low degree of mismatch, it oftentimes is assimilated into the current knowledge structure, just simply integrating that new information into that pre-existing perceptual framework without doing any drastic transformations, reshaping. Accommodation, on the other hand, is the integration of incompatible information. So if the information completely contradicts that perceptual framework, then it has to be accommodated. Essentially, the pre-existing perceptual framework has to be reconstructed around that new information rather than just simply assimilated in. And this, in its essence, completely reconfigures the perception and interpretational model of the individual as they encounter the world yet again. Often individuals have no issues with assimilating new information that supports their pre-existing perceptual structure. Where the issues really arise is whenever they have to accommodate new information. The reconfiguration of their pre-existing structure is extraordinarily difficult to go through. It's a transformative process. The incompatibility between essentially that of reality and the structure, cognitive structure itself, can actually cause tremendous psychological distress. And so it has to be approached, depending on how severe the case is, it has to be approached with empathy, I would say, and humility on the part of the individual for themselves, to know that the accommodation process is going to take much longer than just simply assimilating new supporting evidence. Whenever you have to accommodate, it takes quite a bit of time to be able to reconfigure. And like I said, depending on severity, if you, let's say, for example, you have somebody that is severely ideologically possessed by either the left or right ideologies, it's going to be much more difficult for them to accommodate new information that completely contradicts their knowledge structure they have constructed than it would be for somebody that isn't ideologically possessed. Their level of openness will be much greater compared to the former. So it takes time, it takes humility, it takes patience and grace for oneself as they go through the process of combination. The issue is if you do not choose to go through the process of combination, you end up becoming an ideologue at the end of the day. And you, over the course of time, can easily develop maladaptive schemas, wherein there's a complete incongruence between how you perceive reality and how reality actually is. Like I again cannot reiterate the great comparison of that between somebody that's ideologically possessed, whether it be on the left or right, and their incongruence with their perceptual, how they perceive reality and that of reality itself. So it can be such a drastic, through the combination process, sometimes it's even best to gradually accommodate information rather than it being a huge, through an initial huge chunk of new information, because it can so radically reconfigure the pre-existing schema that the individual collapses their psyche, essentially, entering into a state of almost psychosis. And this does happen, so it's something to be aware of. Whoever is either helping somebody that's going to accommodate new transformative information, or even themselves. So on a neurological basis, the work of Ian McGilchrist is very helpful in further understanding how this process works. So he has kind of essentially spent the past several decades researching hemispheric differentiations and trying to understand how they function. And what he has come to understand is that the right hemisphere of the brain is oriented towards openness, ambiguity, novel information acquisition, and accommodation, while the left hemisphere specializes and it is schematic in its approach, and it appears, all intents and purposes, that it is the place wherein the schemas are constructed and reside. And it helps orient us. Both of them are essential. So it's not that one is, quote unquote, more necessary than the other. They both complement each other, because too much of right hemisphere, there's too much ambiguity, there's not enough foundational structure in which we can orient ourselves. Too much left hemisphere becomes tyrannical, it becomes pathological, to the point where the individual is narrowed in their perceptual values, and they seek to essentially force their perceptions onto the world itself. And we see that perfectly on both the left and right ends of the spectrum, radical ends of the spectrum. And so the best way to approach this, again, is accommodation, depending on the severity of little bits of information being accommodated in over the course of time rather than large chunks. But one way of doing this is through challenging yourself, challenging how you have your perceptions, your interpretational models constructed. Are they coherent? What gaps are within that interpretational model? That's not to say everybody has to be a scholar or academic, some of that sort. However, it is crucial that you should, on a daily basis, seek to study and to incorporate, to acquire and to integrate novel information into your perceptual framework, into your schema, and to meditate on the information, to critically think on the information, see how it fits in. And that is that process, essentially, of accommodation. To graft in, to acquire the novel information, to seek to integrate it through critical thinking skills to figure out how you can reconfigure your perceptual framework to fit around the factual empirical evidence rather than simply having wishful, fanatical type thoughts and perceptions of the world. It's essentially a process of oscillation between right hemisphere functions and left hemisphere functions, between the encounter and acquisition of novel information, and that of integration and critical thinking type accommodation and reconfiguration of the pre-existing schema. A final great example that I like to use is that on the religious front, especially that of the traditional end of the spectrum of Christianity. A lot of people have these tyrannical, almost pathological type restrictive interpretational models of the word itself that cannot be bent any other way. It's a left hemisphere orientation. And for example, the 6 days of creation, let's say, even though it's figuratively written, they'll take it and perceive it through a literal interpretation. And so they construct an interpretational model, and that if anyone counteracts that with scientific evidence, the novel empirical evidence that we have on hand, is heresy. And they either ignore it or do their best to contend with it. Either way, they're not going to accommodate that novel information not into the Bible, but into their interpretational model of what it says within that within the text. When in reality, we should, on the Christian front, the church should take that novel information, seek how it should be accommodated within the Word. Because, I mean, if God created the universe and then He created science, I mean, science is working in the universe. Therefore, we should take it upon ourselves to seek to integrate that novel information the best that we can into the truth, quote unquote, of the Word itself. And again, I know Ken Ham, I've done a video a couple of years ago on Ken Ham talking about how the integration of evolutionary theory into the 6 day Genesis, adding to the Word of God. It's like, no, it's reconfiguring your interpretational model. That's what it is. And you don't care for it. There's nothing that's being reworded or anything. It's the reinterpretation and accommodation of novel information into the pre-existing schema that I would say the pre-existing collective schema that you have formulated, constructed over the course of time. And most of the information that you've constructed it with is outdated. And that's okay. It's time to reconfigure that schema, which adds more value to the belief system than it does take away. So these are just some thoughts on that, on understanding the concept of schema, and just a brief overview. I will continue to do short videos on this very topic as well as many others in the near future. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.